this whole issue around balancing the budget opens up quite a few sort of black holes, so to speak, in terms of how it can impact us. Because if they try and balance this book,
that will be an impact somewhere that
it will affect me, whether it's through the public services or my actual disposable income if it tax me more. And obviously the pension one is another major one, so it just depends on where you are on the age spectrum. So we're going to leave it there and move on to Labour. And I really want to, I think Labour have said a few interesting things in their manifesto that I'd like to touch on. The first one is that they want to end austerity and bring about spending in public services. They also want to nationalise a lot of former public services like rail, post, water, the national grid. They also said they want to invest in the British economy to the tune of about 250 billion over the next 10 years. So they're making quite a lot of sort of ambitious plans and promises. Let's break it down. How would this impact me financially? So let's start with the end of austerity and the investment in public services.
Well, that's go ahead.
Well, they're basically going to blow the budget from the start. Like, we've just been talking about how we need to save 50 billion. These guys are just going to go and invest another 250 billion. So it's a massive gamble. Like what they're trying to do.
What do you mean by a massive gamble?
Well, it's a gamble in the sense that if you're going to go and pump more money in, it may work, it may not work, in the sense that we don't know what the future entails for this country. Something else, we don't know what's around the corner. We don't know if there's a massive recession globally, another one coming through. And if we've just pumped another 250 billion in, that could be curtains for the country.
But on the flip side there, it could also be a good thing.
Yeah, it's a gamble.
And also, but what's not, it's paying for it now. As you said, with the Conservatives trying to reduce the deficit, if they're going, you have to get this money from somewhere. So that means either borrowing more or increasing taxes to be able to pay for what they're pledging.
Right, okay.
So, but instead of if they're saying they're going to end the austerity, then that's not actually...
It's less likely to increase tax. They're just going to borrow.
Most likely borrowing.
Okay, but if I'm not concerned about that, and I'm just looking at this from the basic level...
From a personal point of view, you might think it's a positive thing, saying you might not care about 50, 60 years down the line. So if Labour are going to go ahead and do this now, because you're going to get that benefit now...
The funny thing is, I actually think it will benefit the country in 50, 60 years' time, more likely, because of that's when you'll see the fruits of... If Labour spend that 250 billion well, if they spend it wisely, if they invest it in manufacturing sector and the technology sector, if they invest it in improving the education system and healthcare and helping people to live longer, and people are going to be able to have better jobs with more people employed, paying it back, and we'll be exporting far more into the world. So in 50, 60 years' time, we'll be able to pay back that easily. But the question is, will we get killed on the borrowing?
Well, I think that, I think it was 250, which is 50 per year.
Per year.
They're trying to increase. And I think Labour, what they tried to do is they tried to say that this is fully costed. Basically what that means is, whatever the additional 50 billion of spending that they're planning to implement, they're going to raise an additional 50 billion in tax.
Moving on quickly, I wanted to mention another point. So, aside from ending austerity and spending 250 billion, they've also made pledges to specific groups within the country. So number one is students. They're going to abolish tuition fees, and they've actually brought forth that promise to this new academic year starting in September. They've also said there's not going to be any increase in personal national insurance or VAT. So, I mean, these immediately have financial benefits, for students who are not going to have debt to pay back, or even me as an individual who I'm not going to have to pay extra national insurance contribution or additional VAT on when I go into the supermarkets. So how then, with those promises and ending austerity and pumping money, does everything then fit it into the bigger picture?
Maybe the rich, they get the hit. The rich are going to take the hit on both sides. So on the corporation tax, corporation tax is going to be raised to 26%, I think, over the course of next few years, and there's
Like
going
2020 and 2021, yeah.
and there's going to be an additional tax for anyone that's earning over
£80,000.
£80,000.
Yeah, they're boosting it to 50%.
So that would, as Tom said, that's a fully costed position, and if everybody actually does stay in the country and pays their taxes, then it will work out.
So is it necessarily a bad thing then if the rich are being taxed? Well, I guess
Depends
if
if
it's
it's
rich. Starting with the Labour Party, they've said they're going to introduce rent controls and also build at least 100,000 council and housing association homes a year. I think the Tories have said they're promising to build about 1 million homes by
1 million homes between 2015 and 2020, sorry.
2020. How is this going to impact?
There's twofold. So in terms of Labour, you could say they're looking at the middle earners and the lower earners. In the sense of with the council houses they're looking to build, that'll help people on lower incomes to be able to get their council houses. And then you've got the middle earners in terms of they want to cap rent control, because the rents are hitting the middle income. They're the ones
Because
that
it's about 1,300 in London.
Yeah,
right?
so especially that's a good thing as well. We have to disperse. There's a big difference between London and the South East and the rest of the UK in terms of house prices and wage growth. It's quite different between each region. So I know definitely in London, the middle income is quite heavily squeezed with rent. Rent is a high cost of their outgoing
Every month. Right.
So I guess that's where they're looking. So I guess it also doesn't really cure the problem in terms of for the middle income earners to still get on the property ladder. Actually, it does to a certain extent. 'Cause I guess if rent's capped, hopefully that should allow them to save
more
to then be able to
use things like the Help to Buy.
But I think housing in general is the fact that because land is scarce, it's building of house. That's what's, especially in London and the South East anyway, that's having a big cost on house prices going up.
Right. And what about the Conservative policy then? How is that going to influence?
Well, that's general, so they're not targeting
groups.
They're just saying that they're looking to build 1 million homes between 2015 and 2020. However, I haven't seen any figures of houses that they built before that or since 2015 though. So that's what they say they're planning to do, but I haven't
How
seen
achievable that really is.
I'm not sure.
It's something else. Right, okay. So if I'm looking to buy now, or if I'm just on the face of this, who is really going to appeal to me the most out of these two?
I think
Depends where you sit.
it depends where you really sit. I prefer the unconstrained Conservative version, saying we're just going to build 1 million houses, but I equally do appreciate what Labour are trying to do, in the sense that, years ago you had Margaret Thatcher with the right to buy a council house, and it's almost being able to provide an opportunity for the lower earners being able to save more and eventually buy their house. But it doesn't address the issue of the fact that house prices are comparatively much more expensive now than they were, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I'm always on the fence when it comes to housing policy, because it's a very contentious issue, and it just seems the question never seems to have been answered from previous governments. And as you mentioned earlier, that we don't really have any data on the houses that have been produced. So how are we to even believe that they're even going to want to produce any more houses anyway? So I'm kind of sceptical with these policies on both sides, to be fair. So.
Okay. Well, housing aside, looking at everything that we've discussed, from the economy to housing, comparing Conservative Manifesto to the Labour Manifesto, which one is most likely to, benefit me from a financial standpoint?
It depends where you are. So if you're, and it also depends, the other thing I'd add is it depends on what your aspirations are. So the fact that we're in the UK, one thing that Margaret Thatcher was successful at doing is bringing in this mindset of owning your own home in this country, which isn't really the norm in the rest of Europe.
That's true.
Yeah.
So in Europe, people in Germany and France and Scandinavia, they're quite happy to rent all their lives, and that's quite normal. You know, as long as rent is controlled and at a level that is stable, everybody's quite happy to live like that. But in this country, that's really not. We're quite aspirational in terms of owning your own home, and that is just embedded in the fabric of our society. So, in that sense, it doesn't matter where you currently sit in society, whether it's at the bottom, middle, or top. Everybody wants to own a home in this country. So, from that point of view, looking at Labour's policies, Labour don't really seem to understand that mindset, which is within British culture, and trying to address that.
Putting these things together, if I'm just looking at it on both hands, which one am I most likely to think actually financially, from a financial standpoint, ignoring everything else, which one is going to benefit me the most?
It's all to do with your personal circumstances, and then everyone else's personal circumstances are unique to themselves. So what you as a voter in the election will need to decide and think about how these policies will affect you personally. So it's, as I said, it's about looking into stuff, about choosing one or the other, or say choosing a personality, say Theresa May. It's just about looking at the individual policies and seeing how, that's how I see it, and seeing about how it affects you personally. Because as I said, there's different brackets for the lower earners, the middle income, the higher earners. So it all depends on where you feel you sit.
How about you? How about you guys?
Yeah, I think, as you say, you just have to kind of split yourself, not split yourself, where you're in life. Am I aspiring to own a home? If I am aspiring to own a home, do I have my deposit now, or am I trying to save for the deposit? If I have my deposit now, then I might lean towards one party as opposed to the other one. But if I need some time to save my deposit, then I actually think how I'm going to vote. So those are the kind of things that I think need to be thought about before you make a decision.
And I also think, to go on a bit further from that, I think it's to you as a person that's voting. I think what matters to you, it might not just be your personal circumstances, about what would you like the country to look like. So in terms of infrastructure, 20, 30 years down the line, or the NHS that we have, what kind of NHS would you like to see when you get a bit older? What kind of, how would you like schools to be set up? Because the two parties have different views on how schools should be, as well as your personal income and in terms of houses and things like this. I think it's kind of what issues are important to you, and on that basis, you then make a decision.
That makes sense to you. The NHS is important to me, so
I'll go with that. Cool. No, thanks guys for joining us today. And for those listening, I hope you've gained something from this, and hopefully it shed a bit more light on different issues within currently the UK political sphere. Join us next time for more on Economic Street Bits. I'm Ola.
And I'm Nicholas.
See you next time.
Thank you guys for joining us on our first edition of Economic Street Bits. Please join us next time, where we'll be discussing Brexit and the upcoming Brexit negotiations.
Yeah, you can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Like, share, comment, and let us also know what topics you would like us to discuss. And yeah, stay tuned.